So if I ask you to close your eyes and just, picture the ultimate capitalist, the platonic ideal of the old school cigar-chomping banker, who do you see?
For most of us, it's got to be the Monopoly man, right? Rich Uncle Pennybags.
Exactly. The top hat, the cane, maybe a monocle, if you're feeling that Mandela effect.
Which, fun fact, he never actually wore one.
He didn't. But that's the point. That caricature, it didn't just appear out of the ether. It has a very, very real inspiration.
And the man behind that cartoon was infinitely more complex, vastly more powerful, and frankly, a lot more terrifying than a mascot on a board game.
I mean, it's a safe bet that Rich Uncle Pennybags couldn't have single-handedly saved the United States government from defaulting on its debt. Twice. We're talking, of course, about John Pierpont Morgan.
J.P. Morgan. And while the Monopoly comparison is fun, it really, really diminishes the sheer scale of who this man was. We're not just talking about a rich guy in the modern sense, like a tech billionaire who buys a social media platform on a whim. We're talking about a man who, at the height of his power, didn't just run a bank, he was the bank.
He was the central nervous system of the American economy.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And that's exactly the hook that grabbed me when we started pulling all these sources together. It's hard to wrap your head around because we live in a world with, safety nets.
Right. We have the Fed.
We have the Federal Reserve. We have the SEC. We have deposit insurance. But for a huge chunk of American history, those things just didn't exist.
None of them.
Instead, you had J.P. Morgan sitting in his library in New York playing solitaire and deciding which banks would live and which would die.
It is so difficult for a modern mind to comprehend how precarious that era was.
Right.
There was no central bank in the United States during Morgan's prime. The economy was incredibly volatile. It crashed frequently and violently.
And when it did, the president didn't call some government agency?
He didn't look to Congress. He looked to a private citizen.
Which is just wild to think about. A private citizen with that much leverage. So I think the mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. We want to move past the caricature, past the robber baron, twisting his mustache. We want to understand the mechanics of this power. How did he get it? How did he use it?
And specifically that tension you mentioned in our prep, the tension between order and competition.
Exactly, because we're all taught competition is good, right? Morgan?
Yeah.
He did not agree.
Not at all. That is the central theme we need to keep coming back to. To Morgan, competition, the very thing we celebrate as the engine of capitalism.
The thing that lowers prices and drives innovation.
He saw it as a disease. He called it ruinous. He saw it as chaotic, wasteful, and destructive. His life's work was replacing that competition with what he called a community of interest.
Or consolidation.
In a word, order.
But it was always order on his terms. And we've got a fantastic stack of sources to get us there. We've got biographical records, business archives from the House of Morgan, detailed breakdowns of those huge financial panics.
One's in 1893 and 1907.
And some really interesting, maybe slightly darker stuff on his personal life, his art collecting, his health, the controversies that just never seem to leave him.
And just to set the tone here, we're going to see a man who, yes, he accumulated wealth, but he seemed way more interested in control. He was the architect of the modern American industrial economy.
And whether that architecture is a cathedral or a prison.
Well, that's what historians still debate. But there's no denying he laid the bricks.
So let's unpack this. We have to start at the beginning. Origin story time. And I think there's this misconception that every robber baron was a rags to riches story.
The classic Andrew Carnegie narrative.
Yeah, poor immigrant boy makes good. That is not J.P. Morgan, is it?
Not even close.
Yeah.
This is not a pull yourself up by your bootstraps story. This is a story of dynastic succession.
Right.
John Pierpont Morgan was born on April 17th, 1837 in Hartford, Connecticut, right into the Morgan dynasty. His father, Junius Spencer Morgan, was already a titan.
Okay, so he wasn't starting from scratch.
He was a partner at a massive dry goods wholesaler, then moved into merchant banking in London. Pierpont didn't start from the bottom. He started from a launching pad his father built.
So JP, or Pierpont, which he preferred, and honestly that just sounds so much more aristocratic.
It really does.
He was born into the game. But reading about his childhood, it doesn't sound like he was just a spoiled rich kid. There was a lot of pressure on him.
Immense pressure. He was born into the game, but he was also born into a very specific kind of psychological crucible. His upbringing was incredibly international.
Which gave him a huge advantage.
A perspective most Americans at the time just didn't have. He wasn't just schooled in Connecticut. He was sent to school in Switzerland at a place called Bellerive, where he became fluent in French.
And in Germany, right.
Then the University of Göttingen in Germany. He mastered German so well he could conduct complex business deals in it later in his life.
And he got a degree in what? Economics?
Art history of all things.
Art history.
Yay.
That's surprising for a guy who ended up owning half the railroads in America.
It's a huge tell, though. It totally foreshadows his later life as this voracious collector. But there was another reason for all this travel, a physical one. Pierpont was a sickly child.
Right. He had rheumatic fever.
Yes, and that's a nasty condition, especially in the 19th century. It's an inflammatory disease that can develop after a strep infection.
And it left him with lifelong pain.
Lifelong pain and joint issues. At one point, he couldn't even walk.
Yeah.
His father sent him to the Azores, those islands in the middle of the Atlantic,
To recover.
to convalesce for a year, basically alone. So picture this. You have a boy who is isolated, often in physical pain, highly educated, and constantly being watched from afar by a very demanding father.
Let's talk about that father, Junius. Because the sources highlight this one quote from Junius to his son that feels it's heavy.
It is incredibly heavy, and it defines Pierpont's entire psychology. Junius was a strict disciplinarian. He wrote to Pierpont, "Remember that there is an eye above that is ever upon you, and that for every act, word, and deed you will one day be called to give account."
Eye above. Wow. That's not just do your homework. That's God is watching you, and so am I, and every single mistake you make is a moral failing.
Exactly. It instilled this mix of terror and duty. It created a rigid, almost terrifying sense of religious discipline and this relentless ambition. He wasn't just working for a paycheck. He was working to justify his existence to that eye above.
That's crucial. He didn't see business as separate from his morality.
In his mind, bringing order to chaos was almost a religious calling.
So he starts his career in London under his father's watch.
Then moves to New York to work for Duncan Sherman and Company. He was effectively the representative of British capital in New York.
Which puts him in a very unique, very powerful spot when the American Civil War breaks out.
The perfect spot.
He's young, he's rich, he's in New York with access to all this foreign money. And this is where we get the first real whiff of that robber baron label, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. This is where the polish on that eye above starts to look a little tarnished.
The Civil War was a complicated time for finance, and Morgan made some moves that, well, that critics have never really forgiven him for.
Never. And first, there's the issue of the draft. Morgan was in his mid-20s, healthy enough to work these long hours. He could have fought.
But like a lot of wealthy men at the time, Grover Cleveland, Rockefeller, he took advantage of the Conscription Act.
He did. He paid a substitute.
He paid a guy $300 to go take his place in the Union Army.
$300. That was the going rate.
And we have to be clear, this was legal.
Completely legal. The government actually encouraged it as a way to raise funds. But looking back,
It sets a tone.
it sets a tone. It establishes this separation. There's a class of people who fight the wars and a class of people who finance them.
But the bigger controversy wasn't the draft dodging. It was the rifles. The Hall carbine affair. This story is just wild. Walk us through the mechanics of this deal because it sounds like an out-and-out scam.
This is the incident that haunted his reputation for decades. It's often cited as the origin of the robber baron narrative for him. Here's how it worked.
Okay.
The Union Army was desperate for weapons in 1861. There was a lawyer named Simon Stevens who knew the government had these old Hall carbines sitting in an armory. They were obsolete.
Obsolete and condemned.
The government had actually condemned them and sold them to an arms dealer for just $3.50 each.
Okay, so scrap metal prices.
Basically. So Stevens gets this idea. He wants to buy them from the dealer and immediately flip them back to General Fremont, who was commanding troops in the West and was screaming for guns for $22 each.
Buy at $350, sell at $22. That is a massive markup, almost 600%.
But Stevens didn't have the cash to buy them first. He needed front money.
So he goes to J.P. Morgan.
He goes to Morgan. Morgan looks at the deal and loans him $20,000 to finance the purchase.
So Morgan finances it. But here's the kicker. Weren't these rifles dangerous? I read something about thumbs.
They were notorious. The Hall carbines had a breech loading mechanism that was known to be defective. If you didn't close it perfectly or if it was worn out, the explosion from the gunpowder could blow backwards. There were reports they could literally blow the thumb off the soldier firing them.
Yikes. So just so I have this straight, Morgan finances the sale of thumb-blowing condemned rifles to the Union Army at a 600% markup, While the army is desperate for weapons to fight a war he paid $300 to get out of.
That is the accusation, and it is a damning one.
Okay, but what's the defense? There has to be a defense.
There is. As responsible historians, we have to look at it. Biographers like Ron Chernow argue that there's no hard evidence Morgan knew the rifles were defective, or that he knew about the fraudulent nature of the markup at the time he signed the check.
He just thought it was a normal loan.
Chernow argues he treated it as a standard commercial loan. He lent the money, the guns were delivered, the government paid, and Morgan took his commission and interest. He saw about 55 grand come into his account, took his cut, gave the rest to Stevens.
But then you have other historians, like Matthew Josephson, who actually popularized the term robber baron, who basically say, come on.
Great.
Morgan was a sharp guy. He was meticulous. He presented the bill to the government himself. Is it plausible he didn't know what he was financing?
It's a debate that will never be fully settled because we don't have a smoking gun document, no pun intended. But the optics were just terrible. A congressional committee later investigated and called the profiteers worse than traitors in arms.
Morgan wasn't charged?
No criminal charges.
Yeah.
But the Hall-Carbine affair became shorthand for the idea that these financiers viewed the war as a profit center, not a national tragedy.
And he didn't help that perception with the gold speculation either. That feels even more like betting against the home team.
It does. In 1863, the Union war effort was stalling. Confidence in the Union greenback. The paper currency was wavering.
So Morgan and a partner, Edward Ketchum, they secretly shipped about $1.15 million in gold to England.
Yes, to create a scarcity. By taking that much gold out of the New York market, they caused a temporary spike in the price of gold in the U.S.
And the economics of that. If gold goes up, the greenback goes down.
And if the greenback goes down, it usually meant the Union was losing. So betting on gold was essentially betting against the Union currency.
So if the Union loses a battle, gold goes up and Morgan makes money.
Precisely. He made a fortune on the fluctuation he helped create. Again, strictly legal. But it reinforced this image of a cold, calculating opportunist.
But this is the pivot point in his life.
Yeah.
He moves from this raw opportunism to something else.
Yes. As he matured, he stopped looking for these quick flips and chaotic profits. He started looking for that order we talked about. He realized that chaos might be profitable in the short term, but control was profitable forever.
All right, let's pivot to that because Morganization literally became a verb. It wasn't just business, it was a strategy. It sounds like something out of science fiction. You have been Morganized. What does that actually mean?
Morganization is essentially the process of taking a bankrupt, chaotic, or inefficient industry, taking control of it through financial leverage, reorganizing its corporate structure, and this is the crucial part, eliminating competition to ensure profitability.
See, that eliminating competition part is where I get stuck. I thought capitalism was all about competition. Coke versus Pepsi, Ford versus Chevy. Doesn't competition make things better for the consumer?
To a modern economist, yes. Competition drives innovation and lowers prices. But J.P. Morgan wasn't looking at it from the consumer's perspective.
He's looking at it from the investor's perspective.
Exactly. And you have to understand the specific economics of the railroads in the late 19th century. Railroads are a high fixed cost industry.
Meaning it costs a fortune to lay the track before you ever make a dime.
A fortune. You have massive debt to pay for the tracks and the trains. If you don't fill those trains, you go bankrupt. So you had all these different railroad lines building duplicate tracks parallel to each other. They were desperate for cash flow.
So they started these vicious rate wars.
Vicious. They would slash ticket prices below the cost of operation just to get people on the train. It was a race to the bottom.
Everyone's losing money.
It was ruinous competition. Morgan looked at this and saw waste. He saw capital being set on fire. He believed that if you consolidated these companies, brought them under one roof or a community of interest, you could stop the rate wars.
You could set stable prices.
And sure, the consumer pays more, but the railroad stays in business, the bonds don't default, and the system is stable. He valued that stability over the brawl of the free market.
And he didn't just write op-eds about this. He summoned people to make it happen. The outline mentions the 1889 conference. This sounds like a scene from The Godfather.
It was incredibly dramatic. Morgan summoned the presidents of the major railroads to his home in New York. These were powerful, wealthy men who hated each other. They were warlords.
And Morgan basically locks them in a room.
He does, and tells them to stop fighting. He pushed them to agree to public, reasonable, uniform, and stable rates.
So he created a cartel. Let's just call a spade a spade.
In essence, yes. He was trying to enforce a private treaty among these warring factions, and why did they listen?
Money.
Because Morgan held the purse strings. He was the bridge to British capital. If you wanted European money to expand your railroad, you had to go through the House of Morgan. If you didn't play by his rules, the tap ran dry.
And by 1900, he basically controlled the whole network.
The House of Morgan controlled or influenced a massive web of American transport, something like 48,000 miles of track.
And he didn't stop at railroads. He took this blueprint and applied it everywhere. Electricity, steel.
General Electric is a classic example. He saw Thomas Edison struggling with the business side, so he arranged the merger of Edison General Electric and Thomson Houston Electric Company to form GE.
He literally removed Edison's name from the company.
Which tells you exactly where the power lay. But the crown jewel of Morganization was, without a doubt, U.S. Steel.
The numbers on U.S. Steel are staggering, even today.
It is hard to overstate. In 1901, Morgan decided to consolidate the steel industry. To do that, he needed to buy out Andrew Carnegie, the biggest steel man in the world.
And the story goes that Carnegie just writes a price on a scrap of paper.
$480 million. He hands it to his lieutenant to give to Morgan.
$480 million in 1901 money. That's billions and billions today. Did Morgan haggle? Did he call in the auditors?
No due diligence, no lawyers picking apart the assets. Morgan glanced at the paper and said, "I accept this price."
Wow.
He knew that to create the monopoly he wanted, he had to pay whatever Carnegie asked.
That is an insane amount of confidence. Or hubris.
A bit of both. He merged Carnegie's operation with several others to form the United States Steel Corporation. It was the world's first billion-dollar company.
Capitalized at $1.4 billion.
At a time when the total national wealth of the United States, everything, land, buildings, cash, was estimated at around $90 billion. This one company was a noticeable percentage of the entire nation's value.
So he owns the rails, he owns the steel to build the rails, and he owns the electricity to light the cities. He is effectively the emperor of industry. But his power goes beyond just companies. We need to talk about his role as the unofficial central bank. This is the part that, frankly, scares me the most.
This is where the story becomes almost unbelievable to modern ears. We mentioned that the U.S. had no central bank, the currency was fragile, and twice the U.S. government faced total financial collapse. Twice, J.P. Morgan stepped in to save it.
Okay, let's break down the panic of 1893. What was the crisis? Why was the government going broke?
It was a run on gold. At the time, the U.S. dollar was on the gold standard. You could take a paper dollar to the Treasury and exchange it for gold coin.
Right.
But foreign investors were getting nervous about the U.S. economy, so they started pulling their money out. They were trading in their greenbacks for gold and shipping that gold to Europe.
So the national vault is just emptying out?
Rapidly. By 1895, the reserves had plummeted. The safe limit was considered $100 million. It dropped below $50 million. If it hit zero.
Default. The entire economy implodes.
Total collapse.
And President Grover Cleveland is in the White House watching this happen. What does he do?
Cleveland was paralyzed. He was a Democrat, deeply suspicious of Wall Street. The last thing he wanted to do was ask J.P. Morgan for help.
He tried a public bond offering first.
He did, but it wasn't working fast enough. So Morgan takes a train to Washington. He arrives at the White House, and Cleveland refuses to see him.
So what does Morgan do?
He just sits outside the Oval Office, smoking his cigar, waiting.
That's the power move, to end all power moves. I'll wait.
Finally, Cleveland lets him in. And they're sitting there while the president is trying to find another way out. During the meeting, a clerk comes in and whispers to the president that there's only about $9 million left in the gold vaults.
A single large check could wipe them out before the banks even close that day.
The clock is literally ticking. Morgan looks at the president and says, "The government will default before 3 o'clock today unless you do something."
And Cleveland asks, "What do you suggest?"
Morgan then pulls out an obscure statute from the Civil War era, a legal loophole from 1862 that allowed the Secretary of the Treasury to buy gold directly without congressional approval in an emergency.
He found a loophole the president didn't even know about.
He knew the law better than the government did.
Incredible.
He proposed that he and the Rothschilds, the great European banking family, would sell 3.5 million ounces of gold directly to the Treasury in exchange for bonds.
Just making a profit.
Oh, yes. But more importantly, Morgan promised to use his influence to stop the gold outflow. He would basically order the financial markets to stop betting against the dollar.
So he basically said, I'll lend you the gold to save the country,
Yeah.
but I'm going to make a profit on the bonds, and I'm going to flex my muscles to fix the market.
Exactly. And it worked. The credit of the United States was saved.
But the political fallout for Cleveland was massive.
Disastrous.
Yeah.
The populace screamed that the president had sold out the country to the bankers. It ruined Cleveland's reputation, but it cemented Morgan as the man who owned the country's solvency.
That's 1893. But the Panic of 1907, that sounds even more cinematic. This is the one with the locked library story, right?
Yes. The Panic of 1907 was the absolute peak of his power. It was a classic liquidity crisis. Started with a failed attempt to corner the copper market.
Which led to the collapse of the Knickerbocker Trust Company.
And panic spread like wildfire. People were lining up around the block to pull their money out of banks. Trust companies were falling like dominoes. The New York Stock Exchange nearly had to close because there was just no money.
And again, no Federal Reserve to pump money in.
No lender of last resort. Except Morgan. He was semi-retired at this point, about 70 years old. He came back to New York like a general returning to the front.
And he summons the nation's top financiers to his library.
That beautiful Renaissance-style building on 36th Street filled with rare books and art. He needed the presidents of the other trust companies to put up their own money to save the weaker ones.
And they were reluctant.
They didn't want to risk their own capital. They were arguing, dithering. So Morgan had the doors locked.
He literally pocketed the key. He held the richest men in America hostage.
In a very velvet line hostage situation, yes. He went into the other room and played solitaire, his favorite way to think, while these titans of finance sweated it out.
And he told them what?
He essentially told them, no one leaves until we have a solution. He bullied them. He shamed them. He told them if they didn't act, the whole system would collapse and their wealth would vanish anyway. Finally, at 4:45 in the morning, they broke.
They signed the papers.
Right.
Pledged the money.
But there was one more hurdle, right? The Moore and Schley brokerage.
Right. This brokerage firm was about to fail because it held a huge amount of stock in a company called Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company, or TCI. If the brokerage dumped that stock to raise cash,
the market would crash all over again.
So Morgan's solution was classic Morgan. He proposed that U.S. Steel buy TCI.
Wait, U.S. Steel, the company he already controls. He wants to buy a major competitor to save the market. That sounds convenient.
You see the brilliance and the danger. It saved the brokerage, but it also let U.S. Steel swallow a major competitor at a bargain price.
But there was an antitrust problem.
A big one. Theodore Roosevelt was president now, and he was the trust buster. He'd been breaking up monopolies. So they had to get the president's permission to create a monopoly in order to save the economy.
The irony is just staggering.
Precisely. Morgan sent envoys to Roosevelt and Washington on a night train. They told Roosevelt, we need to do this merger immediately to stop the panic, but we need immunity from antitrust laws.
And Roosevelt blinked.
He had to. Faced with a collapsing economy, he agreed. He let the deal go through.
And it worked.
The panic ended by November 7th. Morgan was hailed as a hero. Crowds cheered him in the street. He had single-handedly stopped a depression.
And this is the key insight, this event was the tipping point.
Yes. The country looked at this spectacle and realized a terrifying truth. One private citizen has the power to save us. That means he also has the power to destroy us.
It was too much power for one man.
And that event directly led to the political will to create the Federal Reserve.
That's a fascinating irony. Morgan's greatest display of power was the very thing that ensured that kind of power would be taken away forever.
It was the last gasp of the era of private central banking. Now, we've painted him as this invincible force, the man who locks bankers in a room and stares down presidents. But he wasn't invincible, was he?
No, he absolutely had limits. And his biggest adversary was that same president, Theodore Roosevelt. We talked about U.S. Steel, but before that, there was the Northern Securities battle.
Right. What was Northern Security?
Another massive railroad trust. Morgan, along with E.H. Harriman and James J. Hill, merged three huge railroads, the Northern Pacific, the Great Northern, and the Chicago Burlington, into one holding company.
And they basically controlled all rail traffic in the Northwest.
All of it.
Yeah.
And Roosevelt sued. He used the Sherman Antitrust Act, which had been collecting dust. Morgan was shocked. He didn't understand this new political reality.
He famously went to the White House and said what?
If we have done anything wrong, send your man to my man, and they can fix it up.
Send your man to my man, like it's a dispute between two kings, not a citizen and the president.
Exactly. He viewed the president as an equal, just another rival to negotiate with, and Roosevelt replied that he didn't want to fix it up. He wanted to stop the illegal monopoly.
And the Supreme Court sided with Roosevelt.
They did in 1904. The company was dissolved. It was a huge blow to Morgan's sense of political invincibility. He realized he couldn't just buy his way out of everything anymore.
Speaking of things he couldn't buy his way out of,
Right.
let's talk about Nikola Tesla. Morgan funded Tesla. I feel like people forget this.
They do. In 1900, Morgan gave Tesla $150,000, which is nearly $5 million today, to build a wireless communication system at Wardenclyffe on Long Island.
And Morgan's goal was practical.
Very. He wanted a competitor to the transatlantic telegraph. He wanted to send stock quotes across the ocean instantly and privately.
Sounds like a smart investment. Why did it fall apart?
Because Tesla was a visionary, not a pragmatic businessman like Morgan. Tesla pivoted. He started talking about using the tower for wireless power transmission. He wanted to beam electricity through the earth, potentially providing free energy to the world.
Free energy. I can just imagine a banker hearing the words free energy and clutching his wallet.
That's exactly what happened. The legend goes that Morgan asked a very simple, very Morgan question. Where do I put the meter?
If you can't meter it, you can't charge for it.
Exactly. If anyone with an antenna can just tap into the power, it destroys the business model of the electric companies. Morgan had just spent millions consolidating, like GE.
So you pulled the plug.
He refused any further funding. He abandoned the project. Tesla begged him, wrote him letters, but Morgan was cold as ice. The project collapsed. It's one of the great what-ifs of history.
Brutal. And then there's the London Underground. I didn't even know Morgan tried to build a subway in London.
He did, in 1902. He wanted to build the Piccadilly line, but he was outmaneuvered by an American rival, a real scoundrel named Charles Tyson Yerkes.
And Yerkes just snatched the rights out from under him.
Using some very shady tactics. Morgan was furious. He called it the greatest rascality and conspiracy I ever heard of. It was a rare, total defeat for Morgan. In London, he was the outsider.
And finally, under failures and near misses, the Titanic. This one gives me chills.
The Titanic connection is deep. Morgan actually owned the White Star Line. His trust, the International Mercantile Marine Company, was the parent company.
So he owned the ship.
He owned the ship, and he had a private suite booked on the maiden voyage. It was specially designed for him, with a private promenade deck and even a special cigar holder in the bathroom. He was supposed to be on that ship.
Why wasn't he?
He changed his plans at the last minute. He was in France. Some sources say he wanted to stay to buy more art. He was obsessing over some tapestries. Others say he was just feeling unwell. But he canceled.
And when the ship sank?
It was a financial disaster for his company, which was already over-leveraged. But his reaction was telling. He was quoted as saying, "Monetary losses amount to nothing in life. It is the loss of life that counts. It is that frightful death."
That brings us to the man himself. We've talked about the banker, the Titan. But who was he? Physically, he was quite distinct. You noticed him when he walked in a room.
You didn't just notice him. You were likely terrified of him. He was an imposing figure, massive shoulders, piercing eyes. People said they looked like the headlights of a train coming at you.
But the most defining feature was his nose.
The nose. We have to talk about it. It wasn't just a big nose.
No. He suffered from a condition called rhinophyma, which is a severe complication of rosacea. It made his nose bulbous, purple, and deformed.
It had a bumpy texture, and for a man who controlled everything, he couldn't control this.
Yeah, he must have been incredibly self-conscious.
Extremely. He hated being photographed. If you look at the official portraits, they're all heavily retouched to smooth out his nose. He would attack photographers with his cane if they got too close on the street.
There was even that cruel rhyme kids used to sing.
Johnny Morgan's nasal organ has a purple hue.
Ouch. Why didn't he get it fixed? Surely he had the money for surgery.
The medical speculation is fascinating. His son-in-law suggested that Morgan refuse surgery because he had suffered from infantile seizures as a child. He was terrified that the trauma of surgery or the anesthetic might trigger the seizures to return.
So he just lived with it.
He lived with the disfigurement. But here's the genius of Morgan. He weaponized it.
How do you mean?
He used his terrifying appearance to intimidate people. He knew he looked scary. When he stared at you during a negotiation, he dared you to look at his nose. If you looked away, you showed weakness. If you stared, you were rude. He trapped people with his own insecurity.
He made people feel small before he even opened his mouth. It adds such a layer of vulnerability to this powerhouse. And his personal life had real tragedy, too. His first marriage.
Amelia Sturgis, Mamie. This is the heartbreaking romantic side of Morgan that doesn't fit the robber baron mold. He courted her as a young man, but she was dying of tuberculosis.
Her family tried to stop the wedding.
They did, saying she was too sick. But he married her anyway in 1861. He literally had to carry her to the altar because she was too weak to stand.
And he thought he could save her.
He took her to Algiers, hoping the warm climate would cure her. She died 4 months later. He was devastated. It left a permanent mark on him.
He did remarry.
To Frances Louisa Tracy. They had 4 children, including his heir, Jack Morgan. But that marriage was more of a partnership. He spent a lot of time away. That first loss, it seemed to lock something away in him.
And he filled that void with stuff. We talked about him being an art history major. He wasn't just a casual collector.
He was a hoarder of high culture, the collector of collections, that's what they called him. He didn't just buy a painting, he bought whole libraries. He bought manuscripts, gems, tapestries, watches.
He was the president of the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
And he wasn't just buying for his living room. He saw it as a patriotic duty. He believed the United States was a great industrial power, but it lacked cultural history. We were a nation of factories, not cathedrals.
So he used his money to raid Europe's history and bring it to New York.
He was buying civilization. The Morgan Library in New York today, that's his personal collection. It has Gutenberg Bibles, original Mozart scores, just incredible things.
Even had a gem named after him.
Morganite, a pink beryl. He was a major patron of Tiffany & Co., and their chief gemologist named that after him. He also funded Edward S. Curtis to photograph North American Indians, a massive project. He had a deep appreciation for preservation.
And he lived large. The yachts. You can't be a Gilded Age tycoon without a yacht.
The Corsair. He had several of them, each bigger than the last. They were basically floating palaces over 300 feet long. He used them to escape the heat of the city and the prying eyes of the press.
And that's where we get that famous quote.
If you have to ask the price, you can't afford it.
Classic. Whether he actually said it or not, it fits the attitude perfectly. So we're approaching the end of his life. The year is 1912. The Peugeot Committee. This feels like the government is finally catching up to him.
The mood in the country had changed. The progressive era was in full swing. People were sick of the trusts. The Peugeot Committee was a congressional investigation into the money trust.
And they hauled Morgan in to testify.
They did. They wanted to prove that a small cabal of bankers in New York controlled the entire U.S. economy.
And they weren't wrong, were they?
The stats were damning. They found that Morgan and his partners held 341 directorships in 112 corporations, controlling $22 billion in resources.
Which was more than the assessed value of all property in the 22 states west of the Mississippi River.
All of it.
But Morgan's testimony, he didn't back down. He didn't apologize.
He was defiant. There's a famous exchange where the counsel, Samuel Untermeyer, asked him if commercial credit was based on money or property. And Morgan replied, "No, sir, the first thing is character."
Character, not collateral, not assets.
He insisted on it. He said, "Money cannot buy it. A man I do not trust could not get money from me on all the bonds in Christendom."
Which sounds noble, but it also sounds like a club. I lend to people I know and trust. Which usually means other rich white guys in his circle.
Exactly. To Morgan, it was about personal honor. To the committee, it sounded like an admission of a closed system where access to capital depended on whether J.P. Morgan liked you.
He also claimed, "I like a little competition."
Which drew laughter in the hearing room because everyone knew he had spent his entire life destroying it. But in his own mind, he truly believed he was a force for good.
He died shortly after that, didn't he? In 1913.
The stress of the hearings took a real toll. He traveled to Rome, his favorite city. He died in his sleep at the Grand Hotel there on March 31st, 1913.
And the reaction tells you everything about his standing.
The stock market closed for 2 hours. That's an honor usually reserved for heads of state. Flags on Wall Street flew at half-staff.
But here's the surprise. His estate. We think of him as the richest man ever. Was he?
When his estate was tallied, his net worth was about $80 million plus the art collection, which was worth another $50 million or so. Now that's about $2 to $3 billion today. A huge amount.
But not Rockefeller rich.
Not even close. John D. Rockefeller, who was worth vastly more, supposedly read the obituary and said, "And to think he wasn't even a rich man."
That is the ultimate shade. He wasn't even a rich man.
It highlights the difference. Rockefeller owned the oil, Carnegie owned the steel, Morgan was a banker. He controlled money, but much of it was other people's money. His power was influence, leverage, and trust, not just raw net worth.
And his legacy. The House of Morgan isn't one thing anymore.
No. The fear of that power led to real changes. First, the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, just months after he died. Then, after the Great Depression, the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933 forced banks to separate commercial banking from investment banking.
So the House of Morgan had to split.
J.P. Morgan & Co. became the commercial bank, which eventually became today's J.P. Morgan Chase. And the partners who left formed Morgan Stanley. So both of those massive modern entities come from the same root.
Before we wrap up, we have to address a modern revelation.
Right.
We talked about origins earlier. In the 2000s, some very dark history came out about the bank's ties to slavery.
Yes, and this is crucial for a full accounting of American finance. In the early 2000s, cities like Chicago passed ordinances requiring companies to disclose any ties to slavery if they wanted city contracts.
So J.P. Morgan Chase did an internal investigation.
They did. And they found that two of their predecessor banks, Citizens Bank and Canal Bank in Louisiana, had accepted enslaved people as collateral for loans between 1831 and 1865.
So plantation owners would say, I need a loan, and they would put human beings up as the security.
Correct. And when the plantation owners defaulted on those loans, the banks took ownership of those human beings. The investigation showed the banks ended up owning approximately 1,250 enslaved people. They took possession of them.
That just turns that whole eye above concept on its head. It's a stark reminder that the capital that built this system wasn't just gold, it was blood.
It is. J.P. Morgan Chase apologized for this in 2005 and set up a scholarship fund, but it serves as a permanent reminder. You cannot separate the history of American capitalism from the history of slavery. They are intertwined in the ledger books.
So we've unpacked the man, the myths, the no's, the power, and the darkness. What does it all mean? J.P. Morgan was just a total paradox.
He really was. A man who saved the nation's economy twice, yet his power was so terrifying, it forced the nation to create the Federal Reserve to replace him. A devout religious man who ruthlessly crushed his competitors.
A patron of the arts who was mocked for his appearance. He built the tracks we still ride on and the companies that still light our homes.
And that brings us to our final thought. Morgan believed ruinous competition was bad. He believed consolidation led to efficiency and stability.
And that is the question for you, the listener, today. Look at our world. Look at big tech. Amazon, Google, Microsoft. We see massive consolidation. We see efficiency. You can get anything delivered in 2 days. We see stability. Are these modern tech monopolies just the new Morganization?
Was Morgan a prophet of modern capitalism, proving that scale is the only way to compete globally? Or is he a warning from history about what happens when one entity or one man holds too much control over the levers of society?
A prophet or a warning? I'll let you chew on that. And hey, next time you play Monopoly, show a little respect to Rich Uncle Pennybags. He might just lock you in his library until you trade in Park Place.
Indeed.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll catch you on the next one.